Hi, boys and girls. It's Mrs. D. Simone, and this week's story is called Curious George Goes to the Beach. This is George, and he lives with his friend, the man with the yellow hat. He was a good little monkey, but he was always curious. And today, the man had a surprise for George. He took George to the beach. They found a spot on the warm sand, and then another surprise. George saw his friend Betsy. "Look, Betsy," her grandmother said. "It's Curious George." But Betsy did not even smile. She had never been in the ocean before, and she was scared. "I know you're a good swimmer," the man told her. "You'll be fine once you get in the water." Feeling better, Betsy walked towards the shore with her grandmother. George helped spread the beach blanket and set aside their lunch. He looked forward to a picnic, but it was not time to eat. It was time to play, and in no time George was having fun. He learned a new game. He dug in the sand, and he made a new friend. Monkeys are good at making friends. When he took a break, George watched the lifeguard. The lifeguard sat in a special chair, and sometimes he blew a whistle. And sometimes he looked through binoculars. It looked like fun to be a lifeguard, and George was curious. Could he be a lifeguard? Before long, the lifeguard took a break. Here was George's chance. Watching the crowd from up high in the special chair, George felt just like a lifeguard. He looked through the binoculars. There was a lot to see at the beach. He saw seagulls flying above, and he saw Betsy on the shore below. She had not been in the water. Then the lifeguard saw George. "Hey!" he yelled. "There's no place for a monkey." George thought it was a fine place for a monkey, but he did not want to get into any trouble, so he climbed down. Back at the beach blanket, George was hungry for a snack. No one would miss just one cracker, thought George, so he took out one and put it on a napkin. It looked good. Now if he could find some cheese. Oh no, what happened to the cracker? Well, he would just have to get just one, a new one. George found another cracker. He turned his back around, and now his cheese was gone. Who was taking his snacks? George was curious. He put down his cracker, and he waited. Look at him back there hiding. And he waited. Now George saw who was taking his treats. It was the seagull, and he was still hungry. George took another cracker, and the bird took it right out of his hand. What fun it was to feed the seagull. George saw more seagulls down by the water. Betsy was there too. George was curious. Could those seagulls be hungry? Indeed, they were hungry. Soon a whole flock had gathered, and George could not feed them fast enough. Luckily, Betsy was glad to help out. Out of the basket came more crackers and cookies and cakes and even the bread for the sandwiches. Still, the birds were hungry, but when George reached for more snacks, the basket was gone. He and Betsy were having so much fun, they didn't know the tide was coming in. They didn't notice the picnic basket was floating out to sea. George felt bad. He didn't mean to lose the basket. Could there be a way to catch it? George thought and thought. Then he remembered the lifeguard. George was no lifeguard, but to save the basket, he knew what he had to do. So quickly he found a float, carried it to the water, jumping aboard, and George began to paddle. He paddled out a little further and a little further and a little further, and finally George reached the basket. Betsy cheered, and then as George paddled back to the beach, Betsy swam out to meet him. Everyone was glad to see George was safe on shore. The lifeguard, who had seen everything from his chair, said, "That was some rescue." George felt proud. The man with the yellow hat picked up the basket. He was curious. "George, is this our basket?" he asked. Poor George. After all that, the basket was empty. There would be no picnic on the beach, and it was all his fault. Excuse me. And then Betsy's grandmother said, "Won't you join us for lunch? We have plenty, and look, now we have a reason to celebrate." Thanks to George, they did have a reason to celebrate. Betsy was in the water, and she wasn't scared anymore. She was having so much fun. After everyone joined Betsy and George for a swim, it was time to eat at last. There were sandwiches and chips and bananas and cookies and watermelon. There was plenty for everyone, and there was even a little for guests. The end. Okay, boys and girls, what you're going to do today is you are going to change the ending of the story. Make it end a different way, all right? So think about a better ending for the story, and think about how you would make it end. Write a few sentences on how it would end and draw a picture, okay? If you can't write the sentences, then just draw the picture. That would be perfect. Bye, boys and girls.